The Mafia boss's daughter looked a tired Waitress in the eyes, pointed with her tiny hand and called her Mama. Not once. Twice. In a room full of strangers, crystal glasses, and men dangerous enough to make silence feel like a threat. And if you've ever wondered what it feels like to be chosen by a child, needed by a broken man, and pulled into a world you were never meant to touch, this story will hit deeper than you expect. It starts on a freezing Boston night. Wet streets, taxi lights bleeding across the pavement. A young woman running late to another shift carrying debt grief and a smile she can barely afford. Then one word changes everything. Stay with me because this isn't just a love story. It's about lost power, danger, and the kind of connection that rewrites fate. Like this video and comment where you're watching from. That one word did not stay behind in the dining room. It followed Mia Hart all the way out into the cold. By the time her shift ended, Boston had turned harder and quieter. The kind of midnight that made every traffic light look lonely. She stepped out of the Marlowe room through the employee entrance with her coat pulled tight around her ribs and Roman Valenti's black business card tucked into the front pocket of her bag, like it might burn through the fabric if it stayed there too long. The alley smelled like rain-old brick and kitchen grease. A delivery truck idled near the curb. Somewhere farther down the block, a siren rose and faded. Mia stood under the yellow spill of a security lamp and pressed her fingers to her temples. Mama. She could still feel the weight of Sophie in her arms, still feel the small, frantic grip of her hands at the back of her neck. Children reached for comfort all the time. She knew that in theory. She was studying child welfare at Bunker Hill Community College and could recite attachment theory in her sleep. But that had not been ordinary. There had been nothing ordinary about the room falling silent around them. Nothing ordinary about a man like Roman Valenti looking shaken and trying not to show it. Mia took out the card and turned it over. Roman Valenti. A number, no title, no company name, no address. Power did not need decoration. She slipped the card back into her bag and started walking toward the bus stop, her sensible shoes tapping across wet pavement. She had just enough money left on her transit card for the ride home and a coffee in the morning if she skipped breakfast. The thought should have occupied her. Usually it did. Rent, tuition, gas, groceries, shift schedules, chapter deadlines. Those were the rails her life ran on. Tonight, none of it felt louder than the sound of that little girl saying a word that did not belong to her. At the stop, Mia stood under the glass shelter with two exhausted nurses and a man in a paint-stained hoodie, all of them pretending not to look at one another. Her reflection in the dark pane looked like someone she only half recognized, pale from the cold. Blonde hair coming loose from its bun, blue eyes rimmed with fatigue. 25 years old and built almost entirely out of discipline. Her phone buzzed. A text from her manager at June's Diner. "Tomorrow, 11 sharp," Patty called out. "Need you on lunch rush," Mia typed back. Got it and tucked the phone away. Another buzz followed almost immediately. This one from her friend Tessa, a nursing student who rented the other half of Mia's tiny apartment and never slept when ordinary people did. "You home soon? I stole your yogurt." Mia smiled despite herself. "Only if you replaced it. No promises." The bus hissed to a stop. Mia climbed aboard, found a window seat near the back, and watched the city move around her in fragments. Brownstones. Pharmacy signs. A pizza place still open on Tremont. Men in dark wool coats smoking under awnings. Boston had always looked expensive at night, even when you were too broke to belong to it. She rested her head against the glass and let the cold bite into her temple. She had been 7 when her parents died. A pileup on the pike during freezing rain. 3 cars, 1 truck, 1 phone call that cleaved life cleanly in 2. After that, it had been her grandmother, Nora Hart, with her peppermint tea, and her practical shoes, and her hands that always smelled faintly of lotion and hospital soap. Nora had raised her in a third-floor walk-up in Dorchester, with floral curtains and second-hand furniture and the unshakable belief that kindness mattered even when money didn't. "Work hard, baby," Nora used to say. but not so hard you forget you have a heart. Mia had never figured out where the line was. By the time she got home, Tessa was in oversized scrubs at the kitchenette counter eating cereal from a mixing bowl. "There she is," Tessa said, around a spoonful. "I was 2 minutes from filing a missing persons report." Mia kicked off her shoes and dropped her bag on the chair by the door. Their apartment was barely large enough for 2 people, and a decent argument, but it was warm. A single lamp glowed over a stack of textbooks. Someone upstairs had their television too loud. The radiator clicked like it was trying to remember how to be useful. "I had a weird night," Mia said. Tessa narrowed her eyes. "Restaurant weird or murder weird?" Mia shrugged out of her coat. "Possibly both." That got Tessa's attention. She set down the spoon. "Sit. Talk." Mia poured herself water and leaned against the counter. She told the story in pieces at first because saying the whole thing straight through made it sound impossible. The man with the bodyguards. The little girl in velvet. The way the child watched her all through dinner. The first outstretched arms. The moment Sophie pressed a hand to her cheek and said "Mama" so clearly that every conversation in the room died on impact. Tessa stared. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." "And the father?" Mia laughed once without humor. "Herman Valenti." Tessa's face changed. "Valenti, as in the Valentis." Mia frowned. "Am I supposed to know who that is?" Tessa gave her a look. "Mia. I grew up in Southie. Everybody knows who that is. Officially, he owns half the port and 10 million square feet of downtown. Unofficially, people mention his name when they want other people to shut up." Mia looked toward her bag, where the black card waited. "He asked if he could bring his daughter back to see me." "Did you say yes?" "I did not exactly say no." Tessa let out a long breath. "That is not better." Mia moved toward the bedroom nook, too tired to defend a thing she did not understand herself. It was the first word she'd ever said. Silence settled for a second. Tessa's voice softened. "Oh." Mia nodded. "Exactly." She changed into an old college sweatshirt and brushed her teeth standing in front of the bathroom mirror with the medicine cabinet door hanging crooked on one hinge. By the time she fell into bed, the city outside had gone dim and steady. Tessa had taken her bowl to the sink and left the small lamp on for her without asking. Mia lay awake longer than she meant to. Not thinking about Roman, she told herself. That was the lie, because she kept seeing the moment his composure slipped. Only for a second. Only because his daughter reached for someone else with a desperation no father could mistake. She had seen powerful men before. Bankers, politicians, donors who wore cufflinks that cost more than a month of groceries. But Roman was something else. Not because of the suit, not because of the men behind him, because the whole room had arranged itself around him without being asked. And yet when Sophie cried, he had looked less like a king and more like a man standing outside a locked door. Mia turned onto her side and shut her eyes. Sleep did not come gently. It came in pieces. In one dream, she was back at 7 years old, standing in a hospital corridor under lights too bright to be kind. Her grandmother was walking away from her in white shoes, carrying a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. Mia called out, but Nora never turned. Then the baby lifted its head, looked straight at her and whispered "Mama," with a voice too old for its face. Mia woke before dawn with her heart hammering. The radiator rattled. Tessa snored lightly from the other side of the curtain. Outside, tires hissed through slush on the street below. Mia sat up, rubbed her face, and laughed under her breath because what else was there to do? By 7:30, she was on the bus to campus with a paper cup of bad coffee warming her hands. The morning crowd wore the usual Boston uniform of black coats and private exhaustion. She opened her child development textbook and stared at the chapter heading without seeing it. Memory attachment, preverbal response. The irony felt personal. Professor Lang taught in one of those bright classrooms that always smelled faintly of dry erase marker and old heat. He was the kind of man who got excited about developmental psychology, the way sports fans got excited about playoff brackets. Usually, Mia liked that about him. Usually, she took neat notes and asked smart questions and let the structure of learning settle her nerves. That morning, she barely heard the opening half of the lecture. Then, Professor Lang said children attach first through safety repetition and emotional resonance. Sometimes a child responds to a person before they have words for why. Mia looked up. A student across the room raised her hand. Can a child ever connect with a stranger immediately? Like really fast? Professor Lang nodded slowly. Yes, it can happen, not often, and the reasons vary. Smell, tone of voice regulation, body language. Children can recognize safety before adults do. Mia wrote that down in the margin of her notebook. Children can recognize safety before adults do. The sentence sat there and seemed to pulse. After class, she crossed campus through sharp-wind backpack slung over one shoulder and stopped outside the library for exactly 30 seconds before she gave in. She went to a public computer terminal, typed Roman Valenti into the search bar, and stared at what came back. Headlines. Real estate acquisitions. Shipping expansion. Philanthropy gala photos. A hospital wing donation. A waterfront labor dispute settled behind closed doors. Rumors dressed up as financial reporting. Roman at podiums. Roman with mayors. Roman at ribbon cuttings, looking like a man who had never once been surprised in public. There was almost nothing about his personal life beyond a brief article from 2 years earlier. Elena Valenti, wife of businessman Roman Valenti, dies following childbirth complications. The statement was short, careful, bloodless. Private family requests respect. No further comment. Mia stared at the photo attached to the article. Elena was beautiful in the polished magazine way that belonged on charity boards and architecture spreads. Dark hair poised, smile hand resting on Roman's sleeve as if she had learned long ago how to stand beside power without being consumed by it. Mia closed the browser. This was ridiculous. She was a waitress and a student with unpaid bills, not an investigator in some tragic society scandal. She had no business wondering about that man or his dead wife, or why their daughter looked at her as if she had walked out of a lost dream. At 11, she tied on her apron at June's Diner and got to work. June's was 6 booths, 8 counter stools, 1 pie case, and enough coffee to wake the dead. It sat on a corner in the South End and smelled permanently of bacon grease, cinnamon, and fried onions. The floor tiles were cracked. The bell over the door stuck in wet weather. There was always one old man at the counter reading a paper like the internet had personally offended him. June herself ran the place with the authority of a benevolent dictator. She was in her 60s, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and built from the kind of competence that made everybody else feel vaguely underprepared. "You look haunted," June said as Mia poured cream into a sugar caddy. "Thank you. I meant tired, but sure." Mia smiled and reached for a coffee pot. "Long night. You're too young for the kind of long nights that put shadows under your eyes. I'm pretty sure debt ages you." June gave a soft snort. "So does Boston rent." The lunch rush hit fast. Office workers, construction crews, a mother with twin boys who threw crayons under the table and apologized every 40 seconds. Mia slipped into motion the way she always did, moving from booth to booth with that careful balance of speed and gentleness that good servers wore like a second skin. She was topping off coffee at the counter when the bell over the door rang and the whole place shifted by a degree. No one gasped. No one went silent all at once. June's wasn't the Marlowe room. People here had too much pride for that. But conversations thinned. Heads turned. A man near the register lowered his newspaper. Roman Valenti stood just inside the diner, tall and dark, in a charcoal coat that looked hand-stitched with Sophie perched on one arm in a pink wool jacket. Snowmelt glistened on his shoulders. One man remained outside by the curb near a black SUV. Another took up position by the door without pretending to be a customer. June looked at Mia, then back at Roman, then muttered, "Well, that explains haunted." Mia set the coffee pot down and wiped her palms on her apron before she could stop herself. Her pulse was suddenly too loud. Roman's gaze found her immediately. Not hungry, not casual, direct. Sophie saw her a heartbeat later and lit up so suddenly it changed her whole face. "Mama," she said, reaching. Every protective instinct Mia had went liquid at once. Roman crossed the diner without hurry. "Miss Hart, I apologize for interrupting your shift. How did you know I worked here?" His mouth tilted just enough to hint at humor. "You said you worked 3 jobs. I know how to fill in the middle. That is a very unsettling sentence. I've been accused of worse." Sophie leaned toward her again, both hands opening and closing. June was already there wiping the counter with a towel she no longer needed. "Well, honey, don't stand there like the floor might explain itself. Take the baby." Mia shot her a look. June ignored it. Mia held out her arms. Sophie went to her, instantly tucking into her chest with a sigh so deep it sounded like relief. Roman watched that with an expression so contained it made Mia careful. June pointed a towel at an empty booth. "Sit. I'll cover your section for 10 minutes, and if it turns into 20, I'll charge him extra." Roman inclined his head as if that were an entirely normal threat to receive over coffee. "That seems fair." They sat across from each other in the corner booth while Sophie played with the paper menu in Mia's lap. Outside the window, pedestrians moved past under umbrellas, and bare branches shook rain into the gutter. June arrived with coffee for Roman and pie for Sophie without taking an order. "I did not ask for this," Roman said. "You look like a man who needs pie," June replied. "Don't make me regret my instincts." For the first time, Mia saw a genuine flash of amusement in his eyes. When June walked away, Roman wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and said, "I took Sophie to see her pediatrician yesterday." Mia adjusted the child on her lap, and she spoke. 3 words there more at home. His voice stayed low. "She asked for you this morning." Mia looked down at Sophie, who was tapping a spoon against the table edge, and smiling to herself like the world had become a safer place overnight. "That's good," Mia said softly. "That's really good." Roman nodded once, but he did not relax. Men like him probably forgot how. For months, she barely spoke at all. Specialists called it developmental delay, complicated by grief regulation and early attachment disruption. She understood language. She just stayed behind a wall. Mia glanced up. And now she keeps looking toward doors as if she expects someone on the other side of them. His gaze held hers across the table. Yesterday she said "Mama" while looking at an elevator. Mia did not know what to do with the ache that moved through her at that. "I'm not her mother. I'm aware." "Roman." He went still at the sound of his first name from her mouth. Not offended, just aware of it. Mia drew a breath. "I don't want her confused." Roman stared into his coffee for a second before answering. "Neither do I. But I want her speaking, sleeping, reaching for something other than silence." He lifted his eyes again. "I'm asking if you would spend time with her. Public places. Daylight, wherever you say. I'll make room in your schedule if money is the obstacle. Number." The word came faster than she intended. Roman blinked once. Mia straightened. "No money, not for this. It's your time. She's a child, not a transaction." For the first time since he walked in, something like respect cut through his composure, clean and visible. "Good," he said quietly. Mia frowned. "Good. I wanted to see whether you would say that." June reappeared with a fresh coffee pot. "I like this one," she said to no one in particular. "He looks expensive and exhausted." Roman surprised Mia by answering. "Both are true." June topped off his mug and pointed at him. "You hurt that girl, and I'll find out where men like you are buried." Mia closed her eyes for half a second. June. Roman did not so much as flinch. Understood. When June left again, Mia could not help it. She laughed, small and helpless. Roman looked at her as if the sound had taken him off guard. "It's not funny," she said. "It is a little funny." Mia shook her head and looked at Sophie, who had smeared apple pie filling across the back of her own hand. Mia reached for a napkin and cleaned it gently. Sophie leaned into the touch as if it were familiar. That was what unsettled her most. Not the title, not the bodyguards, not the fact that Roman Valenti had walked into a corner diner like the city had parted to let him. It was how easy Sophie fit against her. How old is she exactly? Mia asked. 22 months. And her mother? Roman's jaw tightened. He did not look away. Dead after childbirth. I'm sorry. So am I. There was no self-pity in it, only an old exhaustion. Mia lowered her voice. Has Sophie ever called anyone else that? Number. The answer came without hesitation. Mia looked out the window for a moment, watching a cyclist splash through a gutter. I'm studying social work. Roman waited. Children's services eventually, she said. So I know enough to know that attachment can be strange. Fast sometimes. Especially when a child senses safety. Roman watched her very carefully. And do you feel safe, Miss Hart? The question should not have been intimate. Somehow it was. Mia met his eyes. With your daughter, yes. It was not the answer he asked for, but it was the one he got. He accepted it. All right, she said at last. I can meet you twice a week. After class when I can. Somewhere public, no gifts, no money, no games. Roman nodded once. Done. That easy. When it concerned Sophie, yes. Mia should have found that reassuring. Instead, it made the air between them feel charged. He took out his phone. Tell me where and when. She gave him her number before she could reconsider, then immediately hated how aware she was of every second that followed while he typed it in. A moment later, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Roman Valenti. Nothing else. No flourish. No smiling face. Just certainty. Mia put Sophie back in his arms reluctantly, and the child protested with a small wounded sound that went straight through her. Roman settled her with practiced hands, one broad palm rubbing circles between her shoulder blades until her breathing evened out again. He stood. Mia stood with him. June watched from behind the register arm's folded expression unreadable. In that way, older women perfected after decades of watching younger ones walk toward trouble with their eyes open. At the door, Roman paused. Thank you, he said. Mia folded her arms against the cold draft. For what? For not treating her like she's broken. He left before she could answer. The black SUV pulled away into traffic taillights blurring red against wet streets. Mia stayed by the window a second too long. June came up beside her with a pie server in one hand. He is either the worst idea I've ever seen, June said, or the kind that changes a life. Mia let out a slow breath. Those are not as different as they should be. June nodded once. That's true. The rest of the lunch shift passed in a blur. Coffee checks, grilled cheese side of bacon, extra syrup, ketchup, bottle refill. Yet underneath it all, Mia felt the city tilting by a fraction. At some point in the late afternoon, while wiping down table 7, she took out her phone and looked at the new contact in silence. Roman Valenti. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she typed. Thursday, after my last class. 1:30. Frog Pond side of Boston Common if the weather holds. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. We'll be there. Nothing more. Mia slipped the phone back into her pocket and went to refill the sugar caddies, but her hands moved with the strange carefulness of someone carrying a glass too full to the brim. That night, long after the diner smell had washed out of her hair, and Tessa had fallen asleep with flashcards on her chest, Mia sat alone at the small kitchen table, with Roman's black card beside her and the city humming beyond the window. She should have been reading for class. She should have been calculating tips and rent, and whether she could postpone the electric bill another week without consequence. Instead, she sat with an unexpected truth pressing quietly against her ribs. For the first time in a very long while, routine no longer felt stronger than curiosity. And when Mia finally turned off the light and carried her phone to bed, she set it on the pillow beside her as if she already knew she would reach for it before morning. By Thursday afternoon, the city had traded sleet for a cold, bright sky that made every window in Boston flash like steel. Mia crossed Tremont Street with her scarf wrapped high around her throat and her backpack bumping against one hip, trying not to think too hard about the fact that she was on her way to meet Roman Valenti by choice. Boston Common, in late November, had a stripped-down beauty to it. Bare branches, black against white clouds. Benches damp from yesterday's weather. the frog pond rimmed with thin ice that caught the light like glass. Tourists still wandered through with paper cups and cameras, and office workers cut across the paths with that same city urgency that made everybody look like they were late, even when they were not. Roman was already there. Of course he was. He stood near the railing with one hand in the pocket of a dark camel coat, and Sophie on the other arm. Both of them turned toward the pond. There was no bodyguard close enough to spoil the picture, but Mia spotted one anyway near a newspaper stand and another farther down the path pretending to be on his phone. Roman noticed her before she reached them. He always seemed to know exactly where a room ended and where danger began. Sophie twisted in his arms the instant she saw Mia. "Mama." The word came with a smile this time. Mia's heart softened so quickly it almost embarrassed her. "Hey, sweetheart." Sophie reached, and Roman handed her over without ceremony, but not without watching. Mia had started to recognize the way his face gave away nothing, while his eyes gave away everything he would never say out loud. Concern, curiosity, the rough edge of hope he did not trust. "You made it," he said. Mia adjusted Sophie against her coat. "I said I would. That is becoming one of my favorite things about you." Mia shot him a look. "You barely know me." Roman's mouth moved in a way that almost counted as a smile. "I know enough to know you keep your word." They walked slowly along the path, Sophie tucked in Mia's arms at first, and then wriggling down to walk between them, one tiny mitten in Mia's hand and one in Roman's. It should not have looked natural. It did anyway. That was the dangerous part. Sophie stopped every few feet to point at something with solemn wonder. "Bird." "Yes," Mia said. "That's a bird." "Dog." Roman glanced down at the golden retriever trotting past in a red bandana. "That is in fact a dog." Sophie grinned at his tone and repeated the word as if she had invented it herself. The sound of her voice still had newness to it, each word arriving with the care of a child stepping onto ice for the first time. She tested language like she was learning which sounds would hold her weight. Mia crouched when Sophie found a patch of old leaves trapped against the curb. "What color are they?" Sophie frowned hard enough to make both adults smile. "Brown," Mia said gently. "Baun." "Close enough," Roman murmured. Mia looked up at him. "You do know praise is allowed." "I am praising, quietly." "That sounds miserable for everyone involved." He gave her a look that should have felt older, harder, more dangerous than it did. Instead, it felt almost playful. "You're very bold for someone wearing sneakers held together by optimism." Mia stared at him. "Did you just insult my shoes?" "I observed them. They are practical. They are exhausted." She laughed before she could help it, and Sophie looked from one to the other as if trying to follow the shape of the moment. Then, with great seriousness, she pointed at Mia's shoes and said, "Tired." Roman closed his eyes for 1 second. Mia burst out laughing so hard she had to brace a hand on her knee. "You taught her that." "I taught her honesty." "That's rich coming from a man in a coat that probably costs half my rent." Roman took the hit without blinking. Only half. They ended up at a small cafe on Charles Street, where the windows fogged over from the heat inside, and every table seemed occupied by students, nannies, and people pretending their laptops meant they were too busy to notice the world. Roman had chosen a corner booth with a clear view of the door. Mia noticed because she had started noticing things about him she did not mean to notice. He never sat with his back to open space. He touched Sophie often lightly, reassuringly, as if checking she was still there. He never raised his voice, which made everyone else lower theirs. Sophie sat between them with a grilled cheese cut into neat squares and a cup of apple slices. She ate 2 bites, then abandoned the food to lean across the table toward Mia. "Mia," Sophie said. Mia blinked. "What did you say?" Sophie pressed her palms against the table and tried again. "Mia." Roman's eyes met Mia's across the booth. There was no triumph in them, only something quieter and heavier. A father watching a locked room open from the inside. "You got promoted," he said. Mia swallowed around an unexpected knot in her throat. "Looks like I did." Sophie tapped the table, pleased with herself. "Mia, Mama, Mia." Roman looked down then out the window just for a second. The grief passed over his face so quickly most people would have missed it. Mia did not. She touched Sophie's curls back from her forehead and kept her voice soft. "You can call me Mia, sweetheart." Sophie considered this with all the gravity of a judge. "Mamma Mia." Roman choked on his coffee. Mia pressed a hand over her mouth and failed completely not to laugh. That Roman said hoarsely feels hostile. "Your daughter is a genius. She is weaponizing language. She is too. That has never stopped a Valenti." The weeks began to gather a rhythm after that. Tuesdays and Thursdays, when Mia could manage it between lectures and shifts, they met somewhere in the city. The aquarium one Saturday afternoon, when Roman cleared his calendar without admitting that was what he had done. A bakery in the North End where Sophie got powdered sugar on the front of her coat, and Mia wiped it away while Roman watched them with that unsettling stillness. A bookstore in Beacon Hill where Sophie refused every picture book in favor of one about whales she could barely lift. Mia kept telling herself it was about Sophie. Mostly it was, because the child changed in front of her with a speed that felt almost sacred. She laughed now, not often, but fully. She asked for things instead of crying first. She slept longer, according to Roman, though he delivered the information with the careful neutrality of a man who did not want to sound grateful for fear gratitude might turn into dependence. One rainy Tuesday at the aquarium, Sophie stood in front of the giant tank in the central gallery and pressed both hands to the glass. Blue light moved over her face, silver schools of fish folded and vanished. A ray drifted overhead like a shadow with wings. "Fish," Sophie whispered. Then, louder, turning toward Mia with bright eyes. "Fish." Mia crouched beside her. "That's right." Roman stood a little behind them, hands in his coat pockets, looking not at the tank, but at the two of them reflected in the glass. Mia could feel his gaze before she turned and met it. Something lived there now that had not been there 3 weeks ago. Not just interest, not just gratitude. Recognition, maybe. As if he kept arriving at a place he did not mean to know by heart. Sophie tugged Mia's sleeve and pointed upward. "Big." "The ray is big," Mia said. Roman spoke quietly from behind them. "She said 6 new words yesterday." Mia rose and moved to stand beside him while Sophie remained hypnotized by the water. "That's incredible." He nodded once. "She sleeps through the night when she's seen you that day." Mia looked at Sophie's small profile, at the concentration in her face. "Maybe she's settling into a routine." Roman's voice went rough around the edges. "Maybe." She turned to him, then really turned, and saw how tired he was beneath the polish. Not ordinary tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind men carried when they had been holding up too much weight for too long, and had forgotten there were names for the parts that hurt. "You should sit down sometime," she said. One dark brow lifted. "Is that a medical order?" "No, just an observation. You look like you haven't rested in about a year. Closer to 2. His honesty landed between them before either of them could soften it. Mia looked away first. Later, while Sophie napped in her stroller after too much sensory wonder and exactly 3 bites of a soft pretzel, Mia and Roman sat across from each other in the aquarium cafe with paper cups of coffee growing cold between their hands. Neither of them spoke for a minute. Beyond the window harbor, water moved under a slate-colored sky. Gulls wheeled. Tour boats bobbed. Inside, children shrieked with joy at stingrays and parents pretended not to be one inconvenience away from collapse. Mia traced the rim of her cup with one fingertip. "Do you always bring security everywhere?" "Yes." "Even here?" "Yes." "That sounds exhausting." Roman looked at her. "You say that as if I have options." Mia met his gaze. "You usually do." A pause. "Not with Sophie," he said. The answer was simple, but something about it opened a small, quiet door in the conversation. Mia leaned back against the booth and studied him openly now. "Tessa thinks half of Boston is scared of you." "Only half. You enjoy that. It has uses. That is not a denial." Roman's eyes held hers over the rim of his cup. Would it matter if it were? Mia thought about that more seriously than she expected to. About the men stationed always just out of frame. about the stories attached to names like his, about the fact that power sat on him as naturally as a shadow. Then she shrugged one shoulder. "It would matter if I thought Sophie was afraid of you." Roman went still. The noise of the cafe seemed to recede around them. Someone laughed too loudly by the counter. A blender roared and stopped. Sophie shifted in the stroller and sighed in her sleep. Roman set his cup down carefully. "Is she?" Mia answered without games because she had the feeling he could hear evasion the way other men heard lies. Something moved across his face then. Relief, maybe, or pain shaped like relief. "I do not know if I am doing any of this right," he said, almost to the window instead of to her. Mia had never heard his voice sound uncertain before. "You show up," she said. "That counts." His mouth bent faintly. "You make everything sound simpler than it is." "No, I just talk like someone who can't afford euphemisms." That got a real smile out of him. Small, quick, dangerous in its own way, because it changed his entire face. For 1 second, he looked younger than his reputation. Mia hated how much she noticed. A few days later, Roman sent a text at 8:15 on a Wednesday night. Sophie asked if you like pancakes. Mia stared at the message in the cramped employee locker area of the Marlowe room, while another server reapplied lipstick in the mirror beside her. "That depends. Diner pancakes or rich people pancakes?" The reply came before she had finished putting her phone away. "I do not know the difference." Mia smiled down at the screen. "That is the most rich people answer you could have given." A minute passed. "Teach me the difference." She typed back with her thumb while balancing her order pad against one hip. "One tastes like childhood. The other comes with powdered sugar and disappointment." His response took longer this time. "I suspect I have only ever had the disappointing kind." For some reason, that line stayed with her all night. By the end of the month, Sophie had developed rituals around Mia that no one had to teach her. She insisted Mia read the same whale book twice in a row. She demanded one extra hug before climbing back into Roman's SUV. She began offering her treasures for inspection with the solemn pride children reserved for people whose opinions mattered. A red leaf, a cracker in the shape of a moon, a crayon drawing that looked like weather but was apparently a cat. One afternoon in the public garden, Sophie climbed onto a bench in puffy winter boots and announced "Mine family." Mia looked up too fast. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Sophie pointed at Roman, Daddy, then at herself. Sophie, then at Mia, with complete certainty, Mamma Mia. Roman covered his mouth with one hand, looking suspiciously like a man trying not to laugh in church. Mia stared at the child. "We really have to work on branding." Sophie nodded as if that were an entirely reasonable concern. Roman lowered his hand. "I'm never correcting that." "You absolutely should." "I absolutely will not." "Roman." He took one step closer. Hands in his coat pockets. Shoulders relaxed in a way they rarely were. "You have made my daughter speak in full thoughts. You could ask for the moon, and I would hear you out. But I am not arguing with a toddler who thinks she invented your name." There was warmth in his voice now. Not just amusement. Intimacy. Something lived there that did not belong to strangers. Mia looked away, first down at Sophie's little boots scraping the bench. That evening, after Sophie fell asleep in her car seat on the way back from the garden, Roman offered to drive Mia home. She should have said no. Instead, she slid into the back seat beside Sophie, so the child would not wake disoriented, and Roman took the seat across from them, while the city moved by in ribbons of light. The interior smelled faintly of leather cedar and Roman's cologne, something dark and expensive with a trace of spice. Sophie slept with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm and her face turned toward Mia, one small hand still clutching the cuff of Mia's sleeve. Roman watched them quietly for half the ride. "You are very good at this," he said at last. "At what?" He glanced toward Sophie. Her. Mia looked down at the child, then out the window at shop fronts blurring past in the cold. "I don't know about that." "I do." She shook her head. "I'm just paying attention." Roman's eyes stayed on her a moment longer. "That is rarer than you think." Mia did not trust herself to answer right away. The softness of the car, The sleeping child, the low city lights sliding over his face, all of it made honesty feel more dangerous than usual. After a while, she said, "Where is Sophie's mother buried?" Roman's gaze shifted to the opposite window. Back bay lights reflected in the glass, making his face look half memory, half steel. North End Cemetery, family plot. Mia waited. Elena liked flowers too much for someone who knew New England winters, he said. "I still bring them, even when it makes no sense." The car rolled through a red light, turning green. Mia spoke gently. "You still talk to her?" "Yes." "Does it help?" "Number." He paused. "I do it anyway." There it was again, that strange, stripped-down honesty he sometimes gave her with no warning at all. It was never ornate, never self-pitying, just true. Mia looked at him in the dim car. She must have been very beautiful. Roman's jaw flexed. She was kind. The answer told her more. He did not say elegant, did not say perfect, did not say admired. He said kind, like that was the quality that stayed after death, scraped the rest away. She would have loved Sophie, Mia said. Roman closed his eyes for 1 second and opened them again. Yes. By the time they reached Dorchester, Mia could feel the boundary of her ordinary life rushing up to meet them. Triple-deckers, laundromat lights, a corner market still open. The old familiar ache of being one person in one world and another in someone else's. The SUV pulled up outside her building. Snow had started again, soft and lazy this time, catching under the street lamp. Mia tried to slide her sleeve free from Sophie's sleeping hand, but the child tightened her grip without waking. Roman leaned over carefully and eased tiny fingers open one by one. The back of his hand brushed Mia's wrist. Warm, brief, unmistakable. Neither of them spoke for a second. Then Sophie, still asleep, turned her head toward Mia and whispered, "Mama, stay." The words floated in the dim car like a prayer too small for the world. Roman's hand paused over the seat buckle. Mia went very still. He looked at his daughter, then at Mia. Something vulnerable crossed his face and vanished. She says that now, when she doesn't want a moment to end. Mia swallowed. That's a lot of pressure for a Thursday night. It is, but he was smiling faintly sadly, as if the pressure was not the problem. Mia stepped out into the snow with her bag slung over one shoulder and her heartbeat moving much too fast for someone merely going home. Roman got out too because, apparently, even simple goodbyes around him required gravity. He shut the car door quietly so Sophie would not wake and stood with his coat collar turned up against the cold. Up close, under the street lamp, she could see the silver at his temples more clearly. The tiredness at the corners of his eyes. The watchfulness that never fully left him even here on a residential block where the worst visible threat was black ice and bad parking. "You don't have to walk me to the door," she said. "I know." "Then why are you doing it?" Roman looked toward the building, toward the dark staircase inside the glass front, then back at her. "Because the city is not as harmless as it looks." Mia folded her arms against the cold. That sounds like something a dangerous man says to avoid admitting he's worried. His gaze held hers. Maybe it's both. Her breath caught in the winter air. For a second, the whole street seemed to narrow around them. No traffic, no voices, just snow falling softly and the sound of Sophie breathing in the back seat through the cracked window. Mia could have stepped back then. Could have thanked him and gone upstairs and kept whatever this was inside clean, safe borders. Instead, she said, "Tessa thinks you probably have a body count." One dark brow lifted. "And what do you think?" Mia studied him under the streetlight, his face all hard lines and quiet restraint. A man who looked built for command and sorrow in equal measure. "I think," she said slowly, "that you're carrying more than you let anyone see." Roman's expression changed so subtly she could not have named how. Only that it did. Snow gathered on the shoulders of his coat. He did not seem to notice, and that he said, voice low, is the problem with you, Mia Hart. "What problem?" "You see too much." She should have laughed. She almost did. But the words landed in a place that had nothing to do with humor. Mia looked down at the snow collecting on the toes of her worn sneakers. "Good night, Roman." His reply came after the smallest pause. "Good night, Mia." She climbed the front steps without looking back until she reached the landing. When she finally turned, he was still there beside the SUV, one hand resting on the roof watching to make sure she got inside. Mia let herself in and shut the door softly behind her, but she stood in the hallway a moment longer with her hand on the knob, listening to the muffled quiet of the building and the distant hum of the city outside. Only when headlights swept briefly across the frosted glass and disappeared did she move. Upstairs, Tessa was half asleep on the couch with medical flashcards spread across her lap and an old sitcom flickering soundlessly on the screen. "You're late," she mumbled without opening her eyes. Mia set down her bag. "I know." Tessa cracked one eye open. "You look weird." Mia pulled off her scarf and draped it over a chair. "Helpful. No, I mean glowing weird. Which is upsetting because I specifically asked the universe not to turn you into the kind of woman who falls for rich men with organized crime energy." Mia laughed under her breath and headed for the kitchen. "Then you should have asked louder." Behind her, Tessa made a sleepy sound that might have been concern or approval. In the sink, a chipped mug waited beside a half-washed pan. On the counter, a grocery list held together by necessity and optimism sat under a magnet shaped like a lobster. Ordinary life. Small life. Her life. Mia filled a glass with water and stared out the kitchen window at snow falling past the fire escape. She could still feel the ghost weight of Sophie's hand around her sleeve. Could still hear Roman saying "you see too much" as if it were not an accusation at all. She drank the water slowly, then carried her phone to bed. There was one new message waiting. "Thank you for today." She smiled more than she meant to before typing back. "She taught me that my shoes are tired. I think we all need a day off." The reply came a minute later. "She is ruthless. I have no defense." Mia looked at the words in the dark for a long time before she set the phone down beside her pillow and turned out the light. Outside, Boston kept breathing under snow and street lamps and old secrets. Inside, sleep came easier than it had in weeks, warm at the edges and deep enough that when it took her under, the last thing she felt was not fear. It was the beginning of belonging. Belonging settled into Mia's life so quietly that she did not notice how much room it had taken until the first crack appeared. It came on a Tuesday morning, gray, and wind-bitten, the kind of Boston day that turned every building the color of old bones. Mia had just stepped off the bus near campus with a paper cup of coffee warming her hands when her phone vibrated in the pocket of her coat. Roman. She stopped on the corner under a bare tree and answered at once. "Hey." Silence, but not empty silence. The kind packed tight with thought. Then his voice came through lower than usual, stripped of all his polished edges. "Did your grandmother ever work maternity at St. Agnes?" Mia's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "What?" "Your grandmother. Nora Hart. Did she work at St. Agnes Medical?" "Yes." Her pulse was suddenly too quick. "For years. Why?" Another pause. She could hear something in the background on his end. The muffled hum of traffic, maybe. Or an office vent. Or the sound of a man deciding how much truth to say all at once. "I need you to come see me." Mia started walking again without realizing it, her boots carrying her along the sidewalk while her mind stood still. "Roman, you're scaring me." "I know. That is not helpful." "No." His breath moved softly over the line. "It is the best I can do right now." She stopped outside the student center doors. Her coffee had gone forgotten in her hand, cooling in the wind. "What happened?" "I found something." He sounded carefully controlled now, which somehow made her more uneasy, not less. "I do not want to discuss it over the phone." Mia looked through the glass doors at students crossing the lobby inside, backpacks bouncing, earbuds in their lives still moving along ordinary rails. She felt abruptly separate from all of it. "I have class in 10 minutes. I'll send a car after. I can take the tea." "I know you can." The softness of it landed harder than insistence would have. "But let me send a car anyway." Mia closed her eyes for 1 second. "Fine. Thank you." She waited for him to say more. He did not. "Roman." "Yes." "Is Sophie okay?" This time, his answer came without even a breath between. "She is safe." It should have been enough. It was not. Mia sat through Professor Lang's lecture on trauma response with her notebook open and almost nothing written on the page, except a date in the top corner and one line she did not remember putting there. St. Agnes. By 11:15, she was outside the library steps with her scarf pulled tight and a black sedan waiting at the curb. The driver stepped out the moment he saw her. "Miss Hart?" He opened the back door with a respectful nod. Marcus. The name clicked. Roman had mentioned him once in passing the way people mentioned weather or weapon permits. Marcus was the man who handled problems before most people even learned there had been one. Mia slid into the back seat. The interior smelled like leather and cedar. Marcus closed the door gently and took the front. "Is Sophie really okay?" Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Mid-50s, maybe. Broad shoulders, close-cropped gray hair. A face built from discretion. "Yes, ma'am." The title nearly made her laugh. "You do not have to call me that. I was raised better than that." The sedan pulled into traffic and moved south along the river, the city gliding past in cold glass and stone. Roman said he found something Mia said. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. He did. "That is not an answer." "No?" His tone held no offense. "It is not." She looked out the window, jaw tight. "Do all of you speak in fragments, or is that a job requirement?" The faintest ghost of amusement touched his mouth. "Depends who's asking." Mia almost pushed again, then stopped herself. Whatever this was, Roman had wanted to tell her himself. That mattered, more than she liked. They crossed into the financial district, where the streets narrowed and the buildings grew expensive and severe. Marcus pulled into a private loading entrance of a glass tower and spoke briefly to security through his open window before the gate lifted. Mia stepped out into a lobby that looked like it had never known dust. Pale stone floors, black iron fixtures. Quiet that cost money. A receptionist in a cream blazer smiled as if she had been expecting Mia all morning. "Miss Hart, this way please." Mia followed her past polished walls and silent elevators to a private lift that required a keycard and a code entered by one of Roman's men. The doors opened on the top floor into a reception area framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Boston Harbor gray water under a low sky. The receptionist led her to a set of double doors and knocked once. Roman's voice came from inside. "Send her in." The office was large but not flashy. Dark wood, clean lines. Shelves of books that looked read, not staged. A bar untouched in the corner. One wall of windows looking across the harbor to East Boston. The city seemed to crouch beneath him from up here. Roman stood by the glass with his back half turned, one hand in his pocket, the other braced against the window frame. He looked as though he had not slept. His coat was gone. His tie loosened. A stack of open folders lay spread across the low table near the seating area. When the doors shut behind her, he turned. For one heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Mia said the only thing she could. "Where is Sophie?" "With Elena Marino." "At my townhouse." He stepped away from the glass. "She's safe." Mia let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "You keep saying that like I'm supposed to hear the rest inside it." Roman studied her face for a moment. "Sit down." She did because standing suddenly felt impossible. Roman remained on his feet long enough to gather the top file from the table before finally sitting across from her. He set the folder down between them with unusual care, as if he were placing something sharp where it could cut either of them. "I started digging after the first night at the restaurant." Mia's brows drew together. "Because Sophie called me Mama." "Yes, that is insane." It was enough. He opened the folder. Inside were copies of personnel records, old hospital documents, chart notes, and one page in neat, familiar handwriting that made Mia's breath catch before she had fully seen it. Her grandmother's script. Roman slid the page toward her. Mia picked it up with fingers that no longer felt steady. The letter was addressed to Roman, dated 3 days after Sophie's birth. Written on hospital stationery from St. Agnes. The opening lines were condolence. Professional, tender. Then the wording changed. I feel compelled to put in writing that there were irregularities during Mrs. Valenti's labor that troubled me deeply. A medication was administered outside the treatment plan over my objection. I documented what I witnessed and reported it through internal channels. I fear those concerns may be buried. If the truth is ever needed, I pray this reaches the right hands. Nora Hart, R.N. Mia stared at the signature until the letters blurred. She never told me she whispered. Roman's voice came quiet and tight. I never answered it. Mia looked up. His face had gone still in that dangerous way of his, but his eyes were not still at all. I do not remember much from those days, he said. I was arranging a funeral and trying to understand how my wife could be dead in the same building where my daughter was learning how to breathe without her. Mia swallowed hard. How did you find this? I had St. Agnes searched from the inside and from outside. Not officially. He looked toward the harbor once, then back at her. Your grandmother's personnel file listed her as charge nurse in maternity that week. Once I saw the name, I started pulling at the thread. Mia looked back down at the documents. Nora Hart, charge nurse, St. Agnes. The words shifted her grandmother inside memory. Nora had never spoken much about the hospital except in funny stories and practical complaints. Bad coffee, long hours, babies born with lungs like opera singers. Never this, never a dead woman, never a letter to a man like Roman. What do you think happened? Mia asked. Roman leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I think Elena did not die from a clean medical complication. The room seemed to narrow. Mia's voice dropped. You think she was killed? Roman did not answer immediately. He did not need to. The answer sat in every angle of his body. He pulled another page from the file. The original chart summary says postpartum hemorrhage following rapid destabilization. But medication logs are incomplete. Timestamps were altered. One attending physician signed entries after the fact. Mia read without fully processing. A doctor's name, a drug she did not recognize, crossed out numbers. Corrections initialed in different ink. My grandmother wrote that someone administered medication over her objection. Yes, who? Dr. Gregory Keller, lead obstetrician on call. The name meant nothing to Mia and everything to Roman. She could hear that in the way he said it. Not loudly, never loudly, but with the control so exact it sounded carved. And no one noticed this before. Roman let out a humorless breath. Hospitals protect themselves. Families in grief often want one thing more than justice. His gaze lifted to hers. They want a reason they can survive. Mia looked away first. On the shelf behind him stood a framed photograph she had not noticed at first. Roman and a woman with dark hair in a summer dress, both of them younger, somehow easier in their bodies. Elena, her hand rested over a visible pregnancy. Roman's hand covered hers, a whole life preserved in silver and glass, untouched by the file on the table. Mia's throat tightened. My grandmother knew. She suspected Roman corrected, maybe more than suspected. There are references here to private notes she kept apart from official reporting. He tapped the edge of the folder. Those notes are missing. Missing how? As in gone. St. Agnes claims there is no record of them. Administrative archives say they cannot locate any supplemental complaint. Nursing Review Board says her formal concern went nowhere due to insufficient evidence. Mia's eyes burned suddenly. She tried to tell someone. Roman held her gaze. Yes, the grief that rose in Mia was strange and doubled. Grief for a woman she had loved all her life, and grief for the version of Nora she had never fully known. Not just grandmother, not just caretaker. A nurse standing in a labor room trying to stop something wrong with both hands and being overruled. Mia covered her mouth for a second, then dropped her hand. I should have known her better. Roman's expression changed. No. She lived with me. She raised me. How could I not know she carried something like this? Because she did not put it on you. The words landed clean. Mia looked at him, and for a moment the office disappeared around them. No harbor, no files, no city. Only a man who understood too well what people hid in order to protect the ones they loved. "She never wanted me frightened," Mia said. "No," Roman replied. "She wanted you free." The silence after that was heavy, but not empty. Mia wiped under one eye angrily before the tear could fall properly. Roman said nothing. He only stood cross to the sideboard, poured water into a glass, and brought it to her without comment. She took it. "Thank you." He remained standing near her chair, close enough for the quiet between them to feel warmer than the room. "How long have you been looking into this?" "Since I read the letter." And the deeper I go, the more resistance I find." Mia set the glass down. "From the hospital." "From the hospital." "From old board members." "From people who suddenly do not remember which room they stood in that night." He looked toward the windows. "And from someone else." A chill ran through her. "What does that mean?" Roman turned back. "It means information has started moving in circles it should not move in. Questions I ask in confidence are being heard by people who should never know I asked them." Mia stood too quickly. "Roman." His attention sharpened instantly. "Sit." "I'm fine." "You're pale." "I'm angry." "That too." Mia crossed to the window because sitting still felt impossible now. Below them, the harbor moved under a hard gray sky, ferries cutting white scars through dark water. People looked ant-sized from up here. Lives reduced to motion. My grandmother dies. I find out she may have witnessed a murder. And someone is listening while you dig into it. She turned back to him. "You called me because I'm connected to this somehow." Roman did not insult her by denying it. "Yes." The honesty hit harder than comfort would have. Mia nodded once, folding her arms around herself. "This is insane." Roman watched her with that stillness that always made the room feel smaller. "I know." She laughed once too sharp to be humor. "Do you?" He took a step closer. "Mia." She looked up. "I would not have brought you here if I thought distance could still protect you." The words went through her like cold water. "Still." Roman's jaw tightened. "I had your apartment watched for 3 nights before I called you." Mia froze. "You what?" "I put a car on the block. You had me followed. I had you protected. Without asking." "Yes." Anger rose fast and bright. "You do not get to decide that for me." His eyes darkened, but his voice stayed low. "A man ran the plate on Marcus's car yesterday after he dropped Sophie at the townhouse. That happened less than 2 hours after one of my investigators visited St. Agnes Records." The room went very quiet. Mia stared at him. "Someone is watching your people." "Yes, and now me. I do not know yet." She turned away, hands shaking once before she clenched them. The city beyond the glass swam for a second and settled. When she spoke again, her voice came out smaller than she intended. "You should have told me." Roman answered immediately. "You are right." That stopped her. No defense, no command, just that. Mia looked back at him. He stood a few feet away, broad-shouldered, dangerous, tired, and more open than she had ever seen him. The truth of him felt strange in the bright office. This man everyone feared. This man who could make calls and move money and bury a problem under 10 others. Standing there admitting he had handled something badly because fear for her had outrun judgment. The anger in her loosened, though it did not vanish. "Do not do that again." Roman held her gaze. "I can promise to tell you. I cannot promise not to protect you." Mia should have argued. Instead, she asked the thing that mattered most. "What about Sophie? She stays close to me." "Good." A faint breath of relief crossed his face, almost invisible. Mia looked at the open file again at Nora's handwriting and Elena's chart, and the names of people who had turned away from one woman's distress because power or money or fear told them to. Her chest hurt with it. "She reached for me before any of this," Mia said quietly. "Before we knew about St. Agnes. Before your letter. Before anything." Roman's voice went rough. "I know." "Why?" He looked at her as if he had been asking himself the same question in the dark for weeks. "I do not know," he said. "Maybe your grandmother held Sophie before anyone else did. Maybe she spoke to her. Maybe babies remember what the rest of us forget." His gaze searched her face. "Or maybe Sophie saw something in you that she needed, and my explanations do not matter." Mia's heart beat too hard all at once. The space between them shifted. Not because either of them moved quickly. Because the truth had stripped them both down to it. "My grandmother would hate this office," Mia said suddenly, voice unsteady. Roman blinked. "What?" "She'd say it looks like no one ever spills soup in here." The corner of his mouth lifted. She would not be wrong. Mia laughed through the last edge of tears. Roman took one more step forward. Now he was close enough that she could see the tired, red threads in his eyes. The small scar near his jaw she had never noticed before. The pulse beating once in his throat. "I should walk away," she whispered. His voice dropped with hers. "Then why aren't you?" Mia felt the answer before she found the words. "Because Sophie reaches for me like I'm home." Her breath shook. "And because every time you look at me, I forget what a sensible decision feels like." For the first time since she had met him, Roman looked undone. Not dramatic. Not visible to anyone who did not know how tightly he held himself. But she knew now. Knew the way he went very still when something mattered enough to hurt. His hand lifted slowly, giving her time to refuse. Mia did not. His fingers touched her jaw with a gentleness that nearly broke her. Warm. Careful. Reverent in a way she had not expected from a man whose name made other men step aside. When he kissed her, it was not polished, not strategic. It was the kind of kiss built out of restraint worn too thin. Grief and wanting and recognition all crossing at once. Mia's hands found his coat without permission. Roman's other hand came to her waist, steadying her as if the room had tilted for both of them. She kissed him back because there was no honest way not to. When they finally broke apart, both of them, breathing harder than before, Roman rested his forehead briefly against hers. Then the desk phone rang. The sound cut through the room like glass. Roman stepped back at once and crossed to the desk, all softness gone from his posture before he even picked up the line. "Yes." Mia watched his face change while he listened. Every trace of warmth vanished, replaced by a focus so lethal it seemed to alter the air pressure in the room. "When?" A beat. Was she touched? Longer this time. "I'm on my way." He set the receiver down with terrifying care. Mia was already moving toward him. "What happened?" Roman looked at her. No mask now. Only fear sharpened into action. Someone approached Sophie in the park. The blood drained from Mia's face. "What?" Dante intercepted him before he got close enough to take her. Roman was already reaching for his jacket, his phone, the keys in the tray by the desk. "She is physically fine. She is frightened." Mia grabbed her coat from the chair. "Take me to her." Roman did not argue. He only nodded once, already dialing. Men appeared almost immediately, one at the door, one outside the office, movement flowing around Roman with practiced speed. Orders were given in low voices. Cars repositioned. Routes changed. Mia followed Roman through the private corridor and into the elevator, her pulse pounding in her ears. Inside the mirrored lift, with no one else present, he reached for her hand once. Hard, brief. Not romance. Anchor. "I'm moving her." "To where?" "North Shore. The estate." Mia looked up at him. "For how long?" "For as long as I need." The elevator doors opened into the garage beneath the tower. Black SUVs idled in a line engine's rumbling. Marcus stood by the rear door of the lead vehicle with a look that told Mia everything she needed to know before anyone spoke. This was no precaution anymore. Roman guided her into the back seat, then got in beside her. The doors shut. Locks engaged. The convoy pulled out into Boston traffic with impossible speed. Rain had started again, slicking the streets, smearing brake lights into long red streaks. Sirens wailed somewhere to the west. Mia pressed one hand to the seat in front of her as the SUV took a turn too fast and looked at Roman. "What exactly are you asking me?" He did not look away from the city ahead. "I want you with us." Mia's breath caught. Roman. If someone is connecting St. Agnes to Nora Hart, and Nora Hart to you, then I am not leaving you alone in that apartment." He turned to her, then every line of his face hard with conviction. "I can protect you better where I can see you." Mia thought of Tessa, of class notes on the kitchen table, of June's diner and the Marlowe room, and the narrow bed by the radiator and all the ordinary things that had defined safety a week ago. Then she thought of Sophie in a park with a stranger walking toward her. She nodded once. "Okay." Roman exhaled like he had been holding that breath since morning. His hand closed over hers again, stronger this time. Outside, Boston blurred under rain and steel light as the convoy drove north, carrying all three of them toward a place Mia had never seen, and had somehow already begun to need. The rain followed them out of the city, chasing the convoy north in long silver sheets that blurred the highway into streaks of white and red. Mia sat in the back seat with her hands locked together in her lap, the leather cool beneath her palms. Roman's silence filling the space beside her like something living. Every now and then he would lift the phone to his ear, speak in low, precise phrases, then put it down again with the kind of control that looked calm until you saw how hard his jaw had set. No one said Sophie's name more than necessary. That alone told Mia how frightened he was. As the city lights thinned behind them, the dark opened wider. The highway gave way to winding coastal roads lined with stone walls, bare trees, and houses set far back from the street behind gates and old money. Then even the houses disappeared. For long stretches there was only road rain and the black shine of the Atlantic somewhere beyond the trees. The SUV turned onto a private lane flanked by iron fencing and climbed slowly between pines bowed under the weather. Up ahead, lights emerged through the storm. Not one house, a whole estate. The Valenti property sat on a bluff above the water like it had been built to outlast both men and weather. Gray stone, tall windows glowing gold, slate roof slick with rain. Security lights moved in careful sweeps along the perimeter wall. The front gates were already open by the time the convoy reached them, and two men with umbrellas waited under the porte cochere, their eyes scanning the darkness beyond the headlights even as they stepped forward to open doors. Roman got out first. Rain spattered across his shoulders and darkened his hair at the temples. He turned back immediately and held a hand toward Mia, not because she needed help exiting a car, but because he had already decided that for one night at least, he would make no distinction between what she needed and what he could bear. Mia took his hand. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 60s stood beneath the chandelier in the entry hall with the stillness of someone who had spent decades managing chaos without ever raising her voice. She wore a dark dress, sensible shoes, and the expression of a person who missed nothing and forgave very little. Her silver hair was pinned back cleanly. Her eyes went first to Roman, then to Mia, then to the rain beyond them as if taking measure of the danger still clinging to their coats. "Roman," she said. "The child is upstairs with Elena. She cried for 10 minutes and then asked for a rabbit and warm milk." Roman closed his eyes once in relief. "Thank you, Viola." Viola's attention shifted to Mia. Not dismissive, not welcoming, evaluating. "So," she said, "you are Mia Hart." There was no point pretending otherwise. "I am." Viola gave a small nod as if that confirmed something she had already decided. "You're soaked, both of you. Stand there one more second, and I will assume city life has ruined your common sense." Mia blinked. Roman looked almost unbearably close to smiling. Viola turned to a young man in the hall. "Take Mr. Valenti's coat. Find dry clothes for Miss Hart. The room next to the nursery is ready." Mia looked at Roman. "The room next to what?" "The nursery," Viola said before he could answer. "We thought there was no point pretending Sophie would allow anything else." Mia opened her mouth, then closed it again. Viola's gaze sharpened 1 degree. "If you intend to argue, do it after I feed you." That apparently was how the house accepted people, with command. The entry hall opened into rooms that felt less like a museum and more like a family that had refused to let wealth bleach the warmth out of things. Dark wood floors, worn slightly at the center by decades of footsteps, oil portraits alongside framed photographs of children covered in sand and old men on boats. Lamps with amber shades, books stacked on side tables, a grand staircase rising in a slow curve toward the second floor. Mia expected cold formality. Instead, the air smelled faintly of garlic, beeswax, and wood smoke. A woman emerged from a side corridor carrying a small pink blanket and a stuffed rabbit with one ear bent backward. "Elena Marino," she said, introducing herself before Mia could ask. "I help with Sophie when Roman's schedule goes to war with itself." Roman's face softened by a fraction. "How is she?" "Shaken. Clingy." She asked for Mia twice and then fell asleep trying to keep her eyes open. Elena looked toward Mia with tired kindness. "You must be Mia." Mia nodded. Elena handed her the rabbit. "Take this when you go in. It helps. Go in." The phrase tightened something in Mia's chest. Roman gestured toward the stairs. "Come on." They climbed in silence. Halfway up, the sound of the ocean found its way through the walls, a low, constant thunder below the cliff. At the end of the upper hall, a door stood ajar beneath soft nursery light spilling into the corridor. Roman stopped before they reached it. Mia turned to him. For the first time since the call, the steel in him gave way enough for her to see the man beneath it. Not the public one. Not the one with the empire and the men and the long shadow over Boston. Just a father trying to measure fear in terms small enough to survive. "She was not touched," he said quietly. Dante got there before he reached the bench. Mia nodded, even though she had heard it before. "He was carrying a stuffed bear," Roman went on, trying to approach like he was harmless. Her stomach turned. Roman's gaze moved to the nursery door. "I have spent 2 years trying to keep strangers from deciding who gets near my daughter." Mia looked at his hands. Empty now, but not relaxed, and today one almost did. "Yes." The words sat between them. Mia stepped closer without thinking and touched his wrist once lightly. "Then let me see her." Roman held her eyes for half a second before he nodded and pushed the door open. The nursery was all quiet lamplight and sea-colored wallpaper with painted whales moving above white paneling. Sophie lay curled beneath the blanket with her stuffed rabbit clutched under one arm. Dark curls scattered over the pillow lashes damp from tears dried in sleep. One hand rested near her face in the loose, vulnerable shape children had before the world taught them to guard themselves. Mia crossed the room on instinct more than decision. When she sat carefully on the edge of the bed, Sophie stirred. Her brows knit. Her little hand moved once across the blanket, searching. Mia touched her hair back softly and whispered her name. Sophie's eyes fluttered open. For one terrible second there was confusion in them. Then recognition came and her whole body loosened. "Mama," she breathed, voice rough with sleep and fear. Mia swallowed. "I'm here, sweetheart." Sophie pushed up awkwardly and reached. Mia gathered her into her lap, blanket and all, and felt the tiny frame tremble once before settling against her chest. Not crying now, just holding on as if making sure this was real. Roman remained by the door, still as stone. Mia could feel him watching, but she kept her eyes on Sophie. "You're okay," she murmured. "You're safe. No one gets to scare you tonight." Sophie tucked her face under Mia's chin and sighed. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Eventually, Viola appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with tea bread and a bowl of soup that smelled like rosemary and butter. She took in the sight of Sophie asleep again in Mia's arms and Roman standing guard by the dresser. So she said with soft finality that answers that. No one asked what she meant. Mia was given the room beside the nursery exactly as promised. Dry clothes had already been laid out on the bed. A soft cream sweater that was too expensive for her hands to feel comfortable touching and loose dark pants folded with military precision. Her own bag sat on a chair by the window as if it had materialized there by permission rather than delivery. She stood in the middle of the room for a long moment, disoriented by the strangeness of it. The size of the bed, the polished brass lamp, the heavy curtains framing a slice of black ocean beyond the glass. Somewhere down the hall, footsteps passed quietly, then vanished. Mia changed and washed the city off her face in a marble bathroom large enough to have its own echo. When she came downstairs, the house had settled into that late evening hush particular to places where everyone is awake but no one intends to admit to being tired. Roman stood by the fireplace in the library speaking Italian into his phone. Even without understanding the words, Mia understood the tone. Not loud. Never that. Cold enough to stop blood. He listened, replied in clipped phrases, then ended the call and stood for 1 second with the phone in his hand, staring into the fire. Viola stepped from the hall, carrying more logs. "He has not eaten," she said to Mia, as if handing over a piece of strategic intelligence. "I heard that," Roman said without turning. "Good," Viola replied. "Now hear this. You can terrify the Coast Guard after dinner." Roman glanced over his shoulder. "Since when do you take sides?" "Since a child was frightened in a public park, and the girl she asked for is in my house wearing my best cashmere." Mia looked down at the sweater. "This is yours." "It fits you," Viola said. "Sit." Dinner happened in the informal dining room off the kitchen. Though informal in this house, still involved silver on the table and candles in low brass holders. Elena had gone up to relieve the night nanny in the nursery. Marcus arrived halfway through the meal, rain still clinging to his coat. Dante followed a few minutes later, younger than Marcus by 20 years and all sharp angles and controlled aggression, with a healing cut along one cheekbone, and the kind of stare that made other men revise their choices. The conversation moved in pieces that would have sounded cryptic to anyone else and still sounded only half complete to Mia. The man at the park had no identification. The stuffed bear came from a toy shop in Cambridge. The security camera nearest the bench had been disabled 12 minutes before the approach. No, he had not made it far enough to speak to Sophie. Yes, he ran. No, they had not found him yet. Roman heard every report without interrupting. He ate almost nothing. At one point, Dante's eyes moved to Mia, and then away again in the brief, measuring way of men who understood immediately when someone had become part of the problem and part of the reason to solve it. After Marcus and Dante left the table, Viola took the soup plates and muttered something about stubborn men ruining perfectly good broth. Roman rubbed one hand slowly over his mouth and finally looked at Mia directly. "I'm sorry." She set down her spoon. "For what?" "For the speed of this, for the house, for the guards in the hall, for all of it." Mia thought about the apartment in Dorchester, the clanking radiator, Tessa's cereal bowl in the sink, the life that had made sense 48 hours ago. Then she thought of Sophie on the bed with both hands locked in her sweater and fear still warm in the room around her. "I'm not sorry I came," she said. Something quiet shifted in his face. That night Sophie woke twice. Both times she cried before the sound fully formed, as if her body remembered the terror faster than her mind did. Both times Mia was already out of bed by the time the second whimper came. Roman appeared in the hall the first time in shirt sleeves, feet bare on the runner, his hair rumpled in a way that looked almost young, until you saw the fear in his eyes. Mia lifted Sophie from the bed and paced slowly by the window, the child's cheek pressed against her shoulder, one tiny hand gripping the back of her sweater. Roman stood close enough to help, far enough not to crowd. The lamp painted low gold across the room. Outside, surf struck rock in steady dark blows. Eventually, Sophie quieted. "Mama, stay," she whispered. Mia smoothed a hand down her back. "I'm staying." Roman looked at her, then really looked. And for a moment there was no room for anything else in the nursery but the weight of that promise. The days that followed fell into a pattern stranger than any routine, and yet in some deep, private way more peaceful than Mia's ordinary life had been in years. Morning brought salt wind rattling the window's coffee, already waiting in the kitchen, and Sophie padding in wearing socks and oversized pajamas to demand breakfast from whoever appeared first. Usually Mia. Sometimes Roman, who tied tiny ponytails with the concentration of a bomb technician and cut strawberries into exact quarters as though geometry could protect a child from chaos. There were men at the gates and cameras at every angle, but inside the walls life narrowed into domestic gestures that felt almost stolen. Mia read Sophie's stories on the rug in the sunroom while ocean light spilled across the floorboards. Roman took calls in the study with the door closed, voice low and dangerous, then emerged minutes later to let Sophie climb into his lap and place a sticker on his wrist, as if nothing in his life was harder than that. Viola taught Mia where the extra blankets were kept and pretended not to notice when Sophie began insisting that Mia be the one to pour her milk. Elena laughed quietly one afternoon and said, "Do you know how many trained professionals Roman has paid over the years to get her to trust the world this much?" Mia looked at the little girl drawing circles with purple crayon at the kitchen table. "I'm not a professional." "No," Elena said. "You're something worse." Mia looked up. "Worse." Elena smiled into her tea. "Necessary." On the fourth night after Sophie finally fell asleep without waking in a panic, Mia found Roman alone in the kitchen. The house had gone mostly dark except for the lamp above the stove and the low lights over the sink. He stood at the counter in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. Rain tapped at the windows. Somewhere a floorboard creaked as the old house settled against the weather. "You don't drink it," Mia said from the doorway. Roman looked over. "Sometimes I forget that you notice everything. You poured that 20 minutes ago." He looked down at the amber liquid. "It smells like decisions I survived in my 20s. Mia crossed the room and leaned against the opposite counter. Comforting. "It depends who is drinking." Silence settled warm from the room, and thin from whatever kept him standing there after midnight with a full glass and no intention of swallowing it. "You should sleep," he said finally. "So should you." His mouth moved faintly. "That is probably true." Mia watched him in the low light. Without the suit jacket, without the men around him, without the city beyond his shoulders, he looked less untouchable and more dangerous in a different way. More human, more likely to matter. "This is the part where you tell me I should leave," she said. Roman's gaze lifted. "Would you number?" One corner of his mouth tilted. "Then I won't waste the effort." Mia studied the whiskey. "What exactly is your world, Roman?" He was quiet long enough that she almost thought he would refuse. Then he set the glass aside. "My grandfather unloaded cargo by hand on the East Boston docks," he said. "My father learned quickly that the city respects men who can move goods and keep promises. By the time it came to me, we had shipping, trucking, labor leverage, real estate, and enough favors owed that people stopped pretending the structure was clean." Mia listened. "I run legal businesses," he went on. "I also manage things Boston prefers not to admit it still needs managed. Debts, roots, disputes, men who mistake cruelty for strength, judges who like campaign donations, union heads who like certainty." He held her eyes. "I am not asking you to approve of that." "No," Mia said softly. "You're asking me to understand it." "Yes." The word sat between them with all its weight. Mia looked at his hands, braced on the counter. Strong hands. Precise hands. Hands that held Sophie's shoe while tying the laces with patient care and probably signed documents that changed the course of lives every week. "I'm not scared of your darkness," she said after a moment. Roman's expression shifted just slightly. "I'm scared," Mia finished, "of how easy it is to forget it when you're making pancakes with your daughter." He let out a breath that sounded almost like pain. "That is the fairest thing anyone has said to me in years." Mia's throat tightened. "She loves you." Roman looked toward the dark hall leading upstairs. "That has never been the question. What is? Whether loving me leaves damage." He said it without drama. That made it harder. Mia thought of the guards. The disabled camera. The man at the park with the stuffed bear. The file from St. Agnes. The wife in the photograph. The daughter asleep above them who had needed no time at all to decide that Mia meant safety. She stepped around the island and stood close enough now to feel the heat of him in the cool kitchen. "I'm here," she said. "That has to mean something." Roman turned toward her fully. In the dim kitchen light with the storm at the windows and the house breathing quietly around them, his face softened in a way she had never seen him allow. "I knew the day at the aquarium," he said. Mia frowned slightly. Knew what? That if I were not careful, I would start needing the sight of you in my life. His gaze searched hers without wavering. "I have not been careful at all." Her breath caught. "Roman, I love you." There it was. No shield, no polish, no escape from it. Mia stared at him, the words moving through her like something both terrifying and true. Every smart instinct she owned should have recoiled. Instead, she felt something in her chest open so completely it hurt. "I think," she said, voice unsteady, "you make it very difficult to remember the sensible version of myself." He almost smiled. "That isn't an answer." Her own mouth trembled at the edges. "I know." She lifted one hand and touched his face fingers, skimming the line of his jaw. "It's a start." When he kissed her, it was slower than the one in his office. No less intense. Just less stunned. More chosen. His hand settled at her waist. Hers curled into the front of his shirt. The storm tapped steadily at the panes while the rest of the world narrowed to heat breath and the low, impossible ache of wanting something this much without knowing how to keep it safe. The next morning came with sunlight hard and cold over the ocean, and a message from Marcus waiting on Roman's phone. 3 retired nurses from St. Agnes had agreed to talk. They met that afternoon in a small private room above a closed restaurant in Gloucester arranged through a cousin of Viola's who apparently considered secrecy a household virtue. The women arrived separately. Coats buttoned, high faces set in the wary look of people who had spent too long teaching themselves silence. Mia recognized the age in them before anything else. Not old exactly, just worn in specific places by memory. The first introduced herself as Patricia Donnelly. The second, Janet Ruiz. The third, Carol Bishop. All 3 had worked maternity with Nora Hart the night Elena died. Patricia sat first and clasped both hands on the table. "We would not be here if it wasn't for Nora's granddaughter." Mia swallowed. "You knew my grandmother well." Patricia's expression softened. "Everybody knew Nora. She was the nurse you wanted in the room when things got bad." Roman remained standing by the window for the first few minutes, shoulders set, hands in his coat pockets. He looked less like a businessman than a man restraining violence by habit. Janet glanced at him once. "You've got your father's eyes today." Roman's jaw hardened. "Tell me what happened." The women exchanged a look. Carol pulled a worn notebook from her bag and laid it on the table. "I wrote things down after she said. Not official. Just enough so I wouldn't let myself be told I imagined it later." Mia leaned forward. Patricia began. "Your wife's labor was progressing normally. Slow, but normal. Nora was in charge. Dr. Keller came in halfway through, agitated, already defensive. He said he was adjusting the medication plan." Roman's gaze did not move. Janet took over. Nora argued with him. She said the dose was wrong for where Elena was in labor and that it wasn't charted properly. Keller told her to stay in her lane. Carol opened the notebook to a page crowded with dates and times. 14 minutes after administration, Elena's blood pressure crashed. Then everything moved too fast. Keller started shouting. Orders changed. Nora kept saying something wasn't right. Patricia's eyes had gone bright with old anger. Nora was the one who lifted Sophie out the second she was delivered. Got her to neonatal before the rest of us even processed how bad it was. Mia gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles ached. Roman asked the next question in a voice almost too even to bear. Why would Keller do it? Silence. Then Janet looked at Marcus, who had taken up position by the door, and back to Roman. There were rumors. About what? Keller was drowning in gambling debt. Janet's mouth tightened. And there was talk that someone connected to the family money stood to gain if Elena didn't live to finalize her inheritance. The air in the room changed. Roman's stillness deepened into something dangerous. Mia spoke before the silence calcified. Who? Carol answered without looking up. Dominic Sorrento. Mia saw the name hit Roman physically, though he never moved. Her godfather, Patricia, said quietly, "Your wife trusted him." Roman's voice dropped lower. "He was also my business partner." No one spoke for a moment. Outside the small window, gulls wheeled over the harbor in the hard, pale light. Below them, the restaurant kitchen hummed with some distant domestic task, oblivious to the way an entire life was being rearranged upstairs. Carol pushed the notebook toward Roman. "This is all I have. Notes, dates, what we remembered. Nothing official survived." Nora tried to make copies of everything. A week later, her drawer was empty. Roman took the notebook in both hands. Mia watched his face as he looked down at the pages. There was no dramatic break in him, no shattered posture. Just a terrible narrowing, as if grief and fury were learning how to occupy the same exact space. When they returned to the estate after dark, the house felt different. Not safer. Not more dangerous exactly. Just charged with truth too large for the walls. Sophie had fallen asleep in the sunroom after insisting on showing Viola 3 pebbles she had collected from the garden path. Mia carried her upstairs while Roman disappeared into the study with Marcus and Dante. It was nearly midnight when the first alarm sounded. Not loud enough to shatter glass. Just one short, hard tone that cut through the house with surgical precision. Mia froze in the nursery doorway. A second later, Dante's voice came over the security system, calm and clipped. "Outer gate breach." Everything after that moved at once. Men in dark clothes sprinting across the lawn outside. Doors locking automatically with heavy mechanical finality. Roman's footsteps pounding up the stairs. Mia scooped Sophie from the bed just as the child woke with a frightened cry, all warmth and confusion and sudden tears. Roman reached them in 3 strides, a gun in one hand, and murder in his face. "Bathroom," he said. Mia did not argue. He moved them into the nursery bath, all marble and white tile, and no windows. Then crouched in front of Sophie, for one impossible second, gun low at his side. Voice gentle, as if the 2 versions of him had learned to stand in the same body. "Hey, little bird, look at me. You stay with Mia. I'm right outside." Sophie's lower lip trembled. "Daddy." Roman kissed her forehead and stood. Mia caught his sleeve before he turned away. "Be careful." His eyes met hers, dark and absolute, always. Then he was gone. Mia locked the bathroom door and sat on the floor with Sophie in her lap, while outside the house men shouted over radios, and somewhere below, glass broke. Sophie clung to her, shaking. Mia whispered nonsense and lullabies and fragments of comfort into her curls until the trembling eased by degrees. After what felt like hours, and was probably 12 minutes, Roman's voice came through the door. "It's me." Mia unlocked it. He stood there, breathing hard. Hair, disordered shirt open at the throat. No visible blood on him, though the night seemed to cling to his skin. Behind him, Marcus moved down the hall, giving orders into an earpiece. "What happened?" Mia asked. "Vehicle through the outer gate." Security stopped them before the main house. Roman's eyes went immediately to Sophie. No one got in. Sophie reached for him. Roman took her, and for one brief unguarded moment buried his face in her hair. Later, after the house had settled and the reports were done, and the broken gate was being repaired under floodlights, Sophie refused to sleep unless Mia lay beside her. Roman sat on the floor outside the nursery door, with his back against the wall until dawn. Mia found him there once in the blue dark before morning, head tipped back, eyes open. He looked up when she stepped into the hall. "You should rest," she whispered. "So should you." Mia sat down beside him on the runner shoulder against shoulder the nursery door, inches away. Inside, Sophie slept at last. Outside, the ocean kept striking the cliff as if nothing in the world had changed. By morning, the house looked intact again. That was the strange thing about money and power. They could make damage disappear before breakfast. Men replaced the outer gate. Broken glass vanished. Mud from heavy boots was scrubbed from the stone floor. Fresh coffee waited in the kitchen. The ocean kept hurling itself against the cliff as if the night had been too small to notice. But the people inside the house did not return to what they had been. Mia felt it first in Sophie. The little girl did not let her out of sight that morning. She followed her from nursery to kitchen to sunroom with the bent-eared rabbit tucked under one arm and one small hand always reaching for the hem of Mia's sweater. If Mia stepped into the pantry for crackers, Sophie hovered in the doorway. If Mia knelt to help Viola fold napkins at the long table in the breakfast room, Sophie climbed into her lap without asking and stayed there as if that solved the shape of the day. Roman watched all of it with a face gone quieter than usual. He had changed into a dark sweater and slacks and looked immaculate from a distance. Up close, Mia could see he had not truly slept. The faint roughness in his jaw, the deeper lines around his mouth, the careful stillness of a man holding anger by the throat so it would not roam the house. At one point, Sophie dropped a spoon and burst into tears, as if the sound itself had frightened her. Roman was beside her at once, kneeling on the floor in front of her high chair, one hand on her tiny ankle voice, soft enough that Mia could barely hear. "It's all right, little bird. Nothing bad happened here." Sophie reached past him for Mia. There was no offense in Roman's face when Mia lifted her. Only a kind of old hurt made gentler by love. Later, when Viola sent Sophie upstairs with Elena for a nap, and the house finally exhaled around them, Roman stood with Marcus and Dante in the study with the doors closed. Mia did not mean to overhear, but the house carried voices in strange ways, and when she passed the corridor she caught pieces. Plate was stolen. Vehicle was torched in Lynn. No prints. No witnesses willing to swear to the driver. Sorrento has not returned calls. At the name, Mia stopped. Dominic Sorrento, Elena's godfather, family friend, business partner, the wolf inside the walls. She kept walking before anyone saw her listening. The morning stretched and then tightened again around noon when Roman found her in the sunroom with Nora's old silver locket in her hands. She had not worn it in years. It had been at the bottom of her bag all this time, carried more out of habit than belief. Oval, shaped a little tarnished at the edge with a clasp that stuck in damp weather. Inside were two faded photographs, one of Mia at 8 with missing front teeth and hair cut unevenly by someone who had done their best. The other of Nora in her nurse's whites, younger than Mia, mostly remembered her chin-lifted smile, small and private. The look of a woman who had already learned how much could be asked of her and planned to meet it anyway. Roman leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Viola says you haven't eaten enough to qualify as lunch." Mia looked up. Viola says many things. She is usually correct. Roman crossed the room and sat beside her on the low sofa, close, but not crowding. Through the windows the sea flashed hard and silver under winter sun. Mia rolled the locket once between her fingers. "I keep trying to put my grandmother back together in my mind." Roman waited. "She was tea and coupons and church on Christmas Eve. She was reminding me to wear gloves. She was making soup when I was sick and pretending not to notice when I cried after the rent went up." Mia swallowed. "And now she's also this woman in a delivery room standing up to a doctor with a dead woman on the table and a newborn in her hands." Roman looked at the photograph in the locket. "Both can be true." Mia laughed quietly without humor. "You make impossible things sound very calm." His voice lowered. "That is because if I said them the way they feel, I would have gone through a wall by now." She turned her face toward him. "Do you know who ordered the car last night?" Roman's jaw flexed. "Not yet, but you think it's connected." "Yes, he never lied to her by softness." Mia stared back down at Nora's photograph. "Part of me wishes I didn't know any of this." "Only part." She nodded once. "The bigger part wishes I could ask her why she never told me." Roman's hand settled lightly over hers where it rested on the locket. Warm, steady. Maybe because she knew exactly what this kind of truth costs. Mia closed the locket and let his hand remain over hers a second longer than she should have needed. That afternoon, Richard Boone arrived. Marcus announced him by name, but the man who stepped into the study looked less like a figure from Roman's world and more like someone who had been cornered by his own conscience and had finally discovered it was the sharper enemy. He was in his late 60s, elegantly dressed in a navy overcoat with rain on his shoulders and a face that had once been handsome in a patrician way before greed and fear had rearranged it. 2 attorneys came in behind him, both carrying leather folios, and the tension of men who knew they were walking into a room where legal protection and physical safety did not necessarily mean the same thing. Roman did not offer anyone a drink. Mia stayed only because Roman with one glance made it clear he wanted her there. Boone looked at her first. "You must be Nora Hart's granddaughter." "Mia." He gave a small grave nod. "Your grandmother was braver than the rest of us." Roman remained standing at the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other resting flat against the mantel in a gesture that looked casual until you understood how much force lived in that body. Marcus stood near the door. Dante near the window. Viola had chosen not to appear, which was wise. Mia suspected she would have disliked Boone on sight. "Speak," Roman said. Boone drew in a breath. "Dominic Sorrento came to me 6 months before Elena died. The Riverside Casino Hotel had gone underwater. Permits were delayed. Financing collapsed. Investors were bleeding money. Dominic was desperate to preserve his own position." Roman's face did not move. He believed Elena's controlling shares would pass into an emergency trust if she died. Before final transfer, Boone continued. The assets would be liquidated under dispute conditions. Insurance riders would trigger. Certain losses could be recovered. Mia felt sick all at once. Roman's voice remained level. "And you knew this." "I knew he was looking for a way out." Boone glanced down at his gloves in his lap. "I did not know at first how far he meant to go." "At first." The phrase curdled the air. One of the attorneys opened his folio and laid out copies of wire transfers, shell company records, and a transcribed set of phone calls. Boone pushed them forward with fingers that trembled once before he controlled them. Dr. Gregory Keller had substantial gambling debt through a private bookmaker tied to one of Dominic's entities. There were payments. Then there was a final transfer 2 days after Elena died. Roman said nothing. Boone looked up at him, and for the first time real fear cracked the surface. "I am here because Dominic has lost control. Last night was not approved through anyone who understands consequences. Men are moving around him without discipline. He is frightened, and frightened men become clumsy." Dante's mouth moved in what might have been contempt. Roman remained where he was. "So you came to save yourself." Boone did not insult him by pretending otherwise. "I came because I should have spoken 2 years ago, and because if I didn't come now, Dominic would try something worse." Silence followed. The kind of silence that made men reconsider their own pulse. Then Roman crossed the room, took the transcribed calls and read them with the same concentration he might have given a contract or a death sentence. Mia watched his eyes move once, twice, then stop at a paragraph in the middle of the page. He handed it to her without speaking. Mia read. She did not need all of it. Only one line. "Make sure she doesn't survive delivery. The child can." Her vision blurred for a second and cleared again. Elena's godfather. A man she had trusted. A man who had likely kissed her cheeks at holidays and toasted her wedding and smiled over dinner, ordering her death like an inconvenience in a ledger. Roman took the paper back gently. When he finally looked at Boone, there was something so cold in his face that even the attorneys shifted in their chairs. "Did he tell you why?" Boone swallowed. "Because he believed Elena made you sentimental. He said once she inherited fully, you would never let him force the expansion terms he wanted. He needed her gone before the trust settled." Mia shut her eyes once. Roman's hand tightened around the page. "And Sophie?" Boone looked suddenly older. Collateral, he was willing to leave breathing. No one in the room moved. Marcus's eyes dropped briefly to the floor, as if giving Roman privacy with his rage. Dante stared at Boone with a flatness that suggested he was already measuring the dimensions of a grave and whether soil conditions would be difficult this time of year. Mia looked at Roman and understood in one flash what everyone else in the room understood too. The only thing keeping Boone alive in that moment was Sophie sleeping upstairs under a painted ceiling of whales and clouds. Roman inhaled once, exhaled. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "Marcus." "Yes, boss." "Call Kellerman and the federal contact. Send everything through the legal channel and the private one." His gaze never left Boone. "I want Dominic picked up before sunset." Marcus nodded and stepped into the hall with his phone already in hand. Dante remained where he was. Roman turned to Boone's attorneys. "You will stay on the property until those filings are acknowledged. Then you will leave under escort." One attorney opened his mouth. Roman looked at him once. The man thought better of it. The hours that followed moved with brutal efficiency. Marcus returned with updates. A prosecutor prepared emergency warrants. Digital forensics tied the shell transfers to Sorrento's holding company. Keller's bookmaker rolled over on record the second he realized whose money he had been moving. St. Agnes, suddenly very interested in institutional accountability, reopened internal review and distanced itself from former administrative staff with the speed of a burning man shedding his jacket. By late afternoon, a black SUV sat at the edge of the drive with engine running waiting for Boone and his attorneys. Rain had begun again, light this time veiling the sea. Sophie woke from her nap, cranky and warm from sleep-wanting crackers, then Mia, then Roman, then all three of them at once. Mia took her into the kitchen because the study had become too full of hard voices and paper. While Viola sliced pears and pretended not to listen, Sophie sat at the table in striped socks coloring on the back of an envelope. "Mama, draw." "I'm not very good." "Draw." Mia drew a crooked house. Sophie added a sun the size of a dinner plate. A minute later, Roman appeared in the doorway. He looked exactly the same to anyone who did not know him. Dark sweater, composed face, one hand in his pocket. Yet Mia saw at once that something essential had changed. "It's done," he said. Viola stopped slicing. Mia set down the crayon slowly. "He's been arrested." Roman nodded. "For Elena. For the payments. For conspiracy. Keller, too." Mia felt the breath go out of her. Sophie looked up from the page, noticed the strange silence, and held up the crayon. "Blue." Roman crossed the room, took the crayon from her tiny fist, and crouched beside her chair. "Blue," he agreed softly. The tenderness of that nearly undid Mia more than the news itself. That night he broke. Not in public. Not before the men. Not under chandeliers or in rooms built to impress. He broke in the nursery after Sophie was asleep, and the house had gone quiet enough to hear the pipes shift in the walls. Mia found him standing by the crib, with both hands gripping the rail head bowed. For a second she thought he had not heard her come in. Then she saw his shoulders move once. She crossed the room without speaking. Roman turned before she reached him. His eyes were red, his face gone raw, in a way she had never seen. Not because he lacked control, because control was no longer useful for what hurt. "He did it," Roman said, voice cracked open. "All this time." Mia went to him. He came to her at the same moment, arms wrapping around her with almost desperate force, as if he had been standing upright for 2 years, and only just now understood what collapse required. "I thought I missed something," he said into her hair. "I thought if I replayed the night enough times, I would find the place I failed her. I blamed the hospital, the doctors, fate, myself." He drew a shaking breath. "And all the while it was a man at my table. A man I let near her." Mia held him tighter. "You didn't know." "I should have." The words carried the full weight of a husband's grief and a father's impossible standards. "You loved her," Mia said. "That is not the same thing as failing her." Roman made a sound low in his throat. Not quite agreement, not quite refusal. When he lifted his head, his hands framed her face with a tenderness so unlike the violence he was capable of that it nearly hurt to witness. "You stayed." Mia's eyes burned. Yes. He looked toward the crib where Sophie slept on her stomach rabbit under one arm, little mouth parted. "I don't know what home looks like after this," he confessed. Mia followed his gaze, maybe quieter. He let out one broken laugh. With her. Never. The days after the arrest unfolded strangely the way aftermath often does. Newspapers exploded with headlines and dignified outrage. St. Agnes released statements full of concern and active cooperation. Commentators who had once praised Dominic Sorrento's philanthropy spoke of betrayal in tones that suggested they had always known. Men Roman had once done business with called to express support that sounded suspiciously like relief. They had not been standing any closer to the blast when it went off. Mia did not watch much of it. She watched Sophie instead. Trauma in a child moved oddly. Some mornings, the little girl was all sunlight and chatter, carrying wooden blocks to the rug and announcing colors with fierce concentration. Other moments, she startled at a slammed door or clung at pickup with a grip too desperate for comfort to be casual. Mia stayed. So did Roman. So did routine. One evening, Sophie spiked a fever. Nothing dramatic. A winter virus, Viola said with the authority of a woman who had raised 3 sons and outstared all of them. Even so, the heat in Sophie's cheeks sent Roman into a silent panic Mia recognized only because she had learned him by then. She took over without making a speech of it. Cool cloth on the forehead. Tiny sips of water. Medicine measured carefully. Storybook in a low voice at midnight while Sophie whimpered and burrowed deeper beneath the blanket. Roman stood in the doorway for long stretches watching. At 3 a.m, Sophie finally drifted into real sleep with her hand wrapped around Mia's finger. Mia sat in the rocker beside the bed and closed her eyes briefly exhausted. When she opened them again, Roman was still there. She gave him a tired look. "You know staring does not lower fevers, number. Then why are you doing it?" He came into the room and sank slowly to one knee beside the rocker. Because the light was dim and the hour was soft, and nothing in her had room left for surprise. Mia understood before he spoke that something had been decided. "I can protect shipping routes," Roman said quietly. "I can negotiate with men who think mercy is weakness. I can make prosecutors answer private numbers and judges return calls. But this..." His gaze moved from Sophie's sleeping face back to Mia's. "This is the only thing I have ever wanted that feels worth becoming a better man for." Mia's throat tightened. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small velvet box. Not ornate, not theatrical. Simple and dark in his palm. "I should have asked, under easier stars," he said, with less grief in the room and fewer lawyers in the background. A tear slipped free before she could stop it. Roman opened the box. The ring inside was elegant and clean. A single oval diamond set low in platinum. Beautiful without trying too hard to know it. "Mia Hart," he said, and the use of her full name made the moment feel suddenly almost unbearably real. "Come home with me for the rest of my life. Not because Sophie loves you, not because this house already feels different when you're in it, because I do, because every quiet thing I want now has your face in it." Mia looked at the ring through tears, then at Sophie sleeping inches away, then at the man kneeling at her side with every ounce of his ferocity laid down at her feet in the form of one honest question. "Yes," she whispered. Roman's eyes closed once briefly as if relief itself were a physical force. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand was not entirely steady. Mia touched his cheek with her free hand. "Yes," she said again, stronger this time. From the bed, Sophie stirred and blinked at them through fever-heavy lashes. "Mama." Roman laughed under his breath, wrecked and happy at once. "Yes, little bird." Sophie peered blearily at the ring on Mia's hand. "Pretty." "It is," Mia said. Sophie considered that, then settled deeper under the blanket. "Mama, stay." Mia looked at Roman over their daughter's bed. "I'm staying," she said. Spring came slowly to the north shore. The snow receded from the edges of the lawn in gray patches. Crocuses pushed up by the stone wall. The sea turned from iron to blue on certain afternoons. Sophie's fever passed. Her speech bloomed. She started asking full questions now, some of them impossible to answer without laughing. Why does Viola say no and mean yes with cookies? Why does Daddy have angry shoes? Why is the ocean loud? Mia and Roman took her to Nora's grave one bright morning in March with white tulips and Sophie's rabbit tucked under one arm because the child had refused to leave it behind. The cemetery sat under old trees in Dorchester, modest and windswept with rows of stones close enough to make grief feel companionable. Mia knelt first and placed the flowers. For a while no one spoke. Then Roman stepped closer, hands in his coat pockets, and looked down at Nora Hart's name carved in granite. "You tried to save my wife," he said quietly. "And your granddaughter saved my daughter." Mia felt fresh tears sting unexpectedly. Sophie, too young to understand solemnity, for more than a minute at a time crouched by the stone and patted the earth. "Hi, Nora." Roman looked away abruptly toward the trees. Mia suspected it was either that or cry in broad daylight. By June, the investigation had become prosecution. Dominic Sorrento remained in custody, awaiting trial. Gregory Keller had been formally indicted and was negotiating the kind of cooperation that did not cleanse a soul, but occasionally shortened a sentence. St. Agnes issued a public statement clearing Nora Hart's actions and acknowledging that her concerns had been improperly buried. Mia printed the statement and folded it into her wallet beside Roman's first black business card. The wedding was Viola's idea, and Sophie's demand and Roman's surrender all at once. No cathedral, no ballroom, no magazine spread. The garden at the estate, June, light close, family only. Mia wore ivory silk so simple it made the old money guests blink and then behave. Roman wore black because there had never been another possibility. Sophie wore pale lavender and carried a basket of rose petals with the solemn focus of a child trusted with a task of state. Tessa cried before the ceremony even began, and then denied it aggressively. June came in a navy dress and sensible heels, took one look at Roman, waiting at the front of the aisle, and muttered to Mia, "Well, he looks like he'd shoot a man for wrinkling his cufflinks, but he also looks at you like church bells feel. So I approve." Viola pretended not to smile for most of the afternoon, and failed completely when Sophie announced to the assembled guests that she was in charge of flowers and snacks. An empty chair in the front row held Nora's photograph in a silver frame. When the music began, it was only strings and sea wind, and the soft hush of guests turning. Mia walked the aisle alone. Not because she had no one, because she wanted to. She wanted to walk toward him by her own choice under open sky with the ocean at her back and all the tangled, brutal, beautiful roads behind her visible only to herself. Roman's face when he saw her undid something in everyone who loved them. He looked like a man who had survived a war and somehow still believed in tenderness. Sophie scattered petals with reckless inconsistency, then got halfway down the path, looked up at Mia and gasped loud enough for half the garden to hear. "Mama, pretty." Laughter moved softly through the chairs. Mia smiled through tears. "Thank you, sweetheart." At the front, Roman took her hands and held them with reverence that made the vows almost unnecessary, though they said them anyway. He promised honesty, even when honesty cost him comfort. He promised protection without possession. He promised to make room in his life not only for her love, but for her will, her work, and her stubbornness, which drew a quiet snort from Tessa in the second row. Mia promised to stand in truth with him, not only in peace. She promised not to flinch from the parts of his life that required courage, but also not to let him mistake hardness for strength when softness was called for. She promised to love Sophie in the daily, ordinary ways children remember forever. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Roman cupped her face with both hands before kissing her. The kiss was warm and sure and unhurried, like everything false in their lives had already burned away, and this finally was what remained. The loudest sound in the garden after that was Sophie clapping. At the reception, under strings of white lights and the long gold of evening, Mia stood at the edge of the lawn with a glass of champagne in one hand and her shoes in the other. The sea below the cliff breathed in and out under a pinking sky. Behind her, guests moved through music and laughter and candlelight, while Viola supervised dessert as if national stability depended on proper plating. Roman came up behind her and slipped an arm around her waist. "Mrs. Valenti," he murmured. Mia leaned into him. "That still sounds made up." "It does not. It sounds expensive." He laughed softly against her hair. Out on the lawn, Sophie chased fireflies with Dante of all people, trailing 3 paces behind, as if guarding a visiting head of state. Mia watched their daughter run through the dusk and felt something inside her settle all the way down to the foundation. Not because life had become simple. It had not. Roman's world would always carry weather inside it. There would be meetings, men old debts, and the occasional shadow moving at the edge of peace. Mia's own work would continue too. School finished, licensing ahead, the long road toward helping children who had learned too early how unsafe the world could be. But none of that erased what was true. They had built something stronger than the fear that found them. Sophie, flushed and delighted, ran toward them with both hands cupped around a flicker of light that escaped before she arrived. "Gone," she said, half accusing, half amazed. Roman bent and lifted her into his arms. "That is what fireflies do." Sophie frowned up at the darkening sky. "Wish." Mia smiled. "On a firefly." "On first star," Sophie corrected, pointing. There, just above the horizon, one bright white star had appeared in the blue. Roman looked from it to Mia. He did not ask what she wished for. He already knew. Mia touched Sophie's back, then Roman's wrist, then let herself stand in the exact center of the life that had come for her in the shape of one impossible word: Mama. It had begun as a shock in a dining room full of strangers and Crystal in danger. It had become a child's trust, a man's grief, a dead woman's justice, a grandmother's courage, a family chosen in plain sight. Under the first star of summer, with the ocean below and laughter behind them, Mia did not make a wish. She was already holding it.